For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ben Young and I'm the CEO of Nudge. And so we work with brands to help streamline their native campaigns. And over the last 3 to 6 months, brands have increasingly been coming to us going, we like this idea of programmatic native, but we're struggling to execute it. And so I was like, well, hang on, I kind of know some people that have a horse in this race. So I was like, right, let's get a panel together and let's talk about how we can win at programmatic native. And so on tonight's lineup, we have like a huge cross-section of the industry. So we'll start at the far left. We have Jacob Kreimer, who is like, I call him the programmatic native evangelist. If you follow him on Twitter, you will definitely see that. You'll take it. Yeah. And we've got Dan Holland at Storylab. And so his job is basically to work with brands to help them adopt native. And then we've got Sara Badler from the New York Times. And their job is to go, well, hang on, we want to retain quality and provide transparency to advertisers. How do we do that at scale? We've got Kevin Flood from PowerLinks. And his job is basically to go, how do I connect everyone that wants to do programmatic native? And then we've got Ronan Shields, digital editor at The Drum. And his job is to interrogate these guys. But thank you very much for coming along. Thank you to Ali for hosting us. This is a beautiful space. If you are looking for an office, definitely check this out. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ronan. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ben. Well, look, Ben's obviously introduced us all and said what we're all here to talk about. I guess what probably might actually help some of us is how many people here would you say are from the buy side of the industry? I mean, just a quick show of hands. Many of you be from the... So we got a few, okay. Would the rest of you be from the sell side of the industry, ad tech vendor? Okay.
Not sure.
And the rest of you not sure? Okay. All right. Well, look, we're obviously here to talk about Programmatic Native, which is in the ascendancy. If you look at some of the figures that have been out as of late, it's increased 90% last year, according to some of the research I was doing. Quite interestingly, last week, the Trade Desk, whenever they called their results, it's only their second ever results since they listed on the public market, they said that it's increased 1,000%, which is quite impressive. Would be interesting to get further into those figures. But before we do, it's kind of seems a little bit of a malapropism in terms of programmatic native. You got native, which is kind of more associated with very bespoke advertising units, etc., and then programmatic is more associated with high frequency trading. Kevin, do you think perhaps you could kick us off by giving us your definition?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a misconception that the two cannot overlap. So generally you would classify native and programmatic as two different disciplines. Native is delivering content in a way that matches the surrounding environment and gives users a more valuable and more relevant and less intrusive experience. And on the other side, programmatic is all about automation of the buying workflow, so everything from planning through to targeting, bidding, buying, and then optimization. So the two of them are very separate, and our view is that when you combine programmatic and native, you get this holy grail effect of both a better user experience in terms of the look and feel of the ads, paired with better targeting driven through more effective programmatic channels that can bid in real time and deliver ads based on the user's data and their kind of moment of personal relevance. So, I think this concept of native for branding and programmatic for DR is very much untrue, and you get the two together and it really does help the industry then deliver a more kind of holistic experience in terms of the experience to the user, and for brands it helps them to trace all the way from branding and kind of connecting to the user all the way through to that kind of response event. So I think it's a natural evolution of the industry. I think it's what we would all be doing if we started again 15 years ago and kind of had this nightmare vision of non-viewable, intrusive ads. I think we would say, okay, let's start again and scratch that, and that's kind of what we're all here for.
Okay, all right. Well, I think the rest of you guys have anything to add to that? I mean, do you guys, whenever you're talking to clients, do you find it difficult articulating it to them? Do they ask any questions like that? Perhaps, Dan, you seem...
Something like that. Yeah, because I obviously talk to clients quite a lot, and I think it's a problem we have as an industry, is that we can't define things. And I think actually if we ask anyone in this audience the definition of both native and programmatic, we'll probably have different things. So my 2 cents would be, I suppose even native in itself is on this big sliding scale as I see it. So you have sort of more native advertising, which is sort of what Kevin alluded to there in terms of give me a bank of images, some headlines and a client's logo, and I will then match it form and function to the site it appears on, the feed it appears on, or indeed the platform it appears on. You have that end, and then you have, to give you some context of the Storylab, we're the branded content agency for Dense Regions Network. So you have this, we're the branded content agency for Dense Regions Network. That's what the Storylab do. So we work with clients to create branded content. So if you think about that end of the scale, then that is what I would call pure native, is actually working with publishers such as New York Times to create content in their editorial tone, their editorial voice, and then put that out on their platform. So people, if you think of that's quite a big scale of what native is. So I think that's why there's quite a lot of confusion in the market about what we mean by native. Plus there's everything in between as well, like in terms of like content discovery methods and that sort of thing as well. And then programmatic, for me, programmatic is then just simply the application of data and technology to make smarter communication decisions. And again, I think we often get caught up on just the media and distribution side of programmatic, and we think it's an effective way to deliver out advertising, and we forget about the fact that we can still utilize data, for example, for insights and creative insights to inform our creative process. So now we're trying to merge those two words together in terms of programmatic native. What does that mean? And it's about how do we utilize data and technology to help us create the best content experience for people when they land on the site or they're in a particular feed.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have anything to add? Sarah, you seemed...
I definitely agree. I think especially with, for the New York Times, we are very, we just came out with a native product called the Flex Frame. We have invested a lot in native, and we think that it is something that's happening, that's going forward, that we're very excited about. I think this concept of programmatic native, we're not there yet. I think that in the same, we're pitching, we're talking to clients all the time about how we can work with them in the native space, and then how we transact that through a platform is an added layer of complication that we're still trying to figure out. And I definitely think it's going to be there. I don't think we're there now.
Well, what are some of the complications that, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, if you think about programmatic over the past 5 years, what we've done is we've changed the way that we've transacted ads. Yeah. And then you think about the way that we're looking at what we're asking of clients now is we're asking them to change the way that they're creating ads. And with programmatic, that's taken quite a long time. And I think that with what we're asking agencies to do is going to take quite a long time, because we're trying to automate the way that the creatives are being created, and we're trying to actually scale that in something that's cleaner and aesthetically prettier to look at. So in doing that, it's just, that's where I think that the two have to connect, and then we have to figure out where to go from there.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So I work on MoPub on the strategic partnerships team on the demand side, right? So hustling really good quality advertisers to monetize mostly apps in our case. Yeah. So we were acquired by Twitter about 3 years ago, a little bit more now. And I think what's interesting is, to Sarah's question, like how do we get advertisers to start giving us creative that can be run programmatically on native? Like how do we get the right assets, the right images, the right headlines? I think from our perspective, what's interesting is that, since Facebook came on the scene and then Twitter came on the scene about 10 years ago, advertisers have kind of caught on to the idea that you can run programmatically, like you already have that creative. Like if you're buying anything on Facebook, it's almost always native. If you're buying anything, whether it's on desktop or app or web, like the image that you see is different items pieced together in sort of this bespoke experience that you're talking about, because it looks like Facebook or it looks like Twitter. So our challenge on the MoPub side was, how can we get this idea of something that matches the look and feel of an app like Twitter? Promoted tweets have been around for, at this point, let's say 8 years. How do we take that experience of a promoted tweet and then push it out to anyone else in the ecosystem that wants to use it? So using our product, and I'm sure PowerLinks any native SSP allows you to take that idea of like, how do we take this kind of Facebook, Twitter-ish native feel and then allow any publisher to use that at scale is kind of the question. So if you're a buyer, like you don't want to just buy on one app, you need to buy across multiple apps. And then I think it's kind of that full cycle and full pipeline. What Storylab is making is a full page long read native content. How do we drive users into that content? And so it's like native leading into native is kind of how I see this whole cycle.
Okay, sure. As I mentioned, it's on the rise. 90% was one of the stats I read. But from what I understand, that's off a low base. Kevin, would you where would you say adoption is? Is it kind of low, nascent?
Yeah.
How far are we there on the journey?
So I'd say kind of native outside of Facebook and LinkedIn and some of the big social kind of single touch platforms is still pretty nascent. So one of the stats that I read recently, which was a report from Media Radar, said that about 4,000 brands have invested in programmatic native to date. Now compare that to Facebook's 2 million advertising customers. You've got a fairly big gap between where native is right now and where it could potentially grow to. And I think part of that is, native is still growing at a rapid rate of knots. It's gone from 0 to just over 10 billion. This year, it's expected to level up with display advertising spend by 2020. I think in order for that to happen, it is a case of, number one, the availability of content. Number two, better understanding across the industry. Number three, better measurement and actually kind of educating people in terms of how to take their investment in content or begin investing in content and get that out there with, the right tools to prove ROI. Now, those 4,000 brands that are currently spending on programmatic native, are largely made up of, the big global brands that have, experts like the Storylab at hand to kind of begin producing that content and figuring out how to distribute it. I think programmatic native and the promise of it would be to give self-service tools to, smaller businesses, or to give targeting at a local level or at a contextual level to bring in, SMBs or local advertisers. That kind of thing will drive the gap between kind of the wider web of programmatic native now and, Facebook's 2 million customers. So I think it's well and truly on its way.
Okay. So where's the uptake of native, never mind programmatic native, which you said you didn't think it's quite there yet within the New York Times fold. Where would you say the uptake of native advertising is with your advertisers?
They love it.
How long ago did you launch the product?
I would say we announced FlexFrame Everywhere, which is our native product, about 6 months ago. Maybe a little bit more than that. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen it. I love it. It's beautiful, and I definitely am really excited about it becoming in the programmatic space, which I think will be there soon.
Yeah. Would you be able to give us an estimate on that?
I'm hoping next quarter, but
Okay.
I hope I'm not being quoted.
Okay.
I would say in Q2 we are looking at it. I think marketers want it, and that makes us want it more. We also are working very closely with Google and Google native product, which is going to be coming out also most likely next quarter or even the end of this quarter. So I think things are happening. It's just the same way that I think we talk about mobile or we talk about video a few years ago. It's like the concept is there, and conceptually it makes complete sense, and it's faster and it's cleaner and everything. But it's really hard to automate something that's customized.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make something customized and interesting in what marketers want, and then we're trying to automate it so that we can scale it as a business.
Okay. Just working as a publisher and my own publisher, like we have our own content marketing division, and we did look at the prospect of introducing native ad units, but then we're like, well, then that's going to cannibalize the content marketing thing. And there is that sort of channel conflict where any of those conversations, I mean, maybe not even just at the New York Times, some of your peers, I mean, have you heard those kind of, the classic channel conflict?
I mean, you definitely hear about it all the time.
How did you guys kind of resolve that? What was your own thought process?
Yeah, I mean, what we've thought about is we think of programmatic just in general as a way to transact.
Right.
It's not necessarily something different. It's not DR. It's not, it's premium CPMs. It's direct business. It's going to marketers and talking to them and saying, how do you want to transact? Oh, you want to transact programmatically? Or, oh, you want to transact directly? Either are possible. And the programmatic team works with the direct team in doing that. So we're one team essentially that's going to market, and that's kind of how we've solved for it. With native, it's one of those things where when marketers say we definitely want this, we want to work with them, and so we're trying to customize a solution for them until we can automate it.
Okay. So obviously we referenced the difficulties in customizing the content, so you can have these great native ad units and you can make them scale. Obviously that's your job, Dan, kind of doing that internally.
It is.
How is that can you talk us through some of the difficulties with the creative optimization?
Well, I think that's the challenge generally. I think we've all spoken today about how we can automate form and function.
Yeah.
But people lose sight of how you automate messaging, which is more difficult to do, and people have like headline optimizing tools and things like that. But the key really is then when it's okay just automating the native unit, which then drives someone somewhere. But that experience of when they actually then click through, they need to go to where they expect. You can't mislead the consumer and drive them, like sort of draw them in with, come and see this great content about this particular thing, and they click through and it's e-commerce site. Which I think
I was looking to get to the regulation point earlier, especially if we've got like fake news or such a thing.
Oh yeah.
But
I'm not going to do an impression. I'm not going to. But yeah, so I think that's the challenge is around that messaging, and so we would always prefer to work with a publisher direct,
right,
and work closely with the editorial team, because we sort of believe in like an audience-led approach, as in you use data and insights to fuel the content you're creating. You create content that audience desires, and then you layer in brand messaging where you can, rather than just try and disguise advertising as content.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a bit of a shame, as I think some people are treating native as a way of they're going, okay, if you think about ad blocking and the rise of ad blocking, some people are going, oh, we need to make content, we need to make things more relevant for people. That's what that's suggesting. Some people are actually out there saying, how do I get around ad blocking? Is native a way of getting around it? We shouldn't think like that. We should be fundamentally changing the way we as brands communicate with consumers, just recognizing that they're not going online to see ads. They're going online to consume content. So how do we actually give them that, if they're there to be entertained, give them entertaining content. If they're there to be informed, give them informative content. And actually be truly native to that platform and the experience they're there to do. Especially when you think about in-feed on mobile, they're there to consume content, not see ads. So that's kind of where I'd like to see us go as content makers.
Okay. And Jacob, are you able to talk about any of that? Obviously, the MoPub platform, it's quite interesting. Whenever Twitter always calls the results, I want to hear more about it, but it just never seems to come up in the conversations when the analysts talk. I think it's like probably one of the most interesting parts of the Twitter business.
Yeah, I think so too. So MoPub has grown so quickly since the acquisition, and I think in the beginning, part of that was like just the buzz generated by Twitter itself. But I think our product has been really solid thus far. So since the acquisition, we have launched a bunch of new ad formats. One of them is being more robust, so publishers and buyers can transact not just on native. In more ways, we recently added native video to the mix as well. So in that same native placement, instead of a static image, you could serve a 30-second or minute-long video that begins on play, and then when you scroll out, it stops playing. Or when you scroll back to it, it picks up where you left off. We've rolled out rewarded video as well. So the options of like the rewarded video or opt-in video, in the sense that a user can choose to engage with an experience, maybe in exchange for an additional level, or in the case of a game, you'd get a life back. Or in the case of content, you could see more of an episode or something like that. So MoPub has done really well, not just because we're shipping many more ad formats, but native has actually been a huge part of that. And I think there's a few reasons why native has grown. One, as you've said, publishers love it, and advertisers like to see the outcomes that happen. It drives really high quality traffic. If you're driving site traffic generally, native will always perform well because the user has a really good sense of what they're about to see, they're also, by clicking on the ad, showing intent in a way that a banner ad just doesn't do. So if a user is scrolling through Twitter, right, they're looking for something to entertain them. They're looking for something else because what they've seen thus far hasn't captured their attention. The same thing is true on any other app. If they're scrolling because they're looking for something more. They're looking for something interesting. Like, consider your habits on any social app, right? And so when a user clicks on a native ad, it's because the headline and the image has captivated them. And so the quality is generally better with higher intent on native across most advertisers. It's also really flexible, right? Because as you were saying, there's all these different assets. You've got the title, you've got like a short headline, you've got a call to action that is way easier and variable. You don't have to go back to the creative agency, get a brand new creative, wait for it to be approved by the brand, wait for someone to come back from their vacation so that they can give it, like the process is much faster on native, which has made it much more flexible, not just for publishers, but for advertisers as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess just to go back to the earlier question that we started asking, Kevin, where would you say the take-up of programmatic native is within the, like, would you rate it high, low? I mean,
like the adoption?
Yeah.
I think it's okay. It's still early days. So it's early days because a lot of household name publishers like the New York Times are just kind of dipping their toes in the water. I think also we see generally on any ad exchange, app installs, particularly on mobile, they're kind of like leading the way. Yeah. Right. So before I was at Mopub, I was at a company called Fixu. Okay. We did user acquisition for apps. Had a very sad exit, but in any case, our biggest client at the time was Groupon, and I like to think about that like Groupon isn't top of mind the way that they once were, but any e-commerce app that needs more users or any game that has a lot of in-app purchases, like they're going to be the first ones to dip their toes in the water. It's almost always going to be e-commerce or gaming that experiments with new ad formats, and maybe you guys are seeing this too. After that wave, we kind of enter like phase 2, which is direct response from maybe more household name advertisers, either driving towards promoted content or maybe like insurance lead gen, that type of thing. And I think that's kind of the phase we're in. So user acquisition for apps is, I think, very adopted, very high adoption on native. Mm-hmm. We're now sort of in the phase where brands are learning from their success in the early days and understanding how to apply that to kind of more traditional brand metrics, like where the user is in the funnel. Is it like awareness? Are we actually driving them towards an action? So for app install campaigns, cost per install campaigns, very high adoption. For brands, I'd say like we're, on a scale of 0 to 10, I'd say brands are right now maybe at like a 3. A handful of them have dipped their toes in, but there's so much upside as they continue to learn about the format.
Mm-hmm. And when you say about 3, would that be like the the classic 70, 20, 10 kind of split? The 10 being the very experimental.
I was like, I shouldn't have said a number. I knew I was stepping in it. I think.
What kind of bracket of those 3? Would you
say? I think it also depends on where the demand's coming from, right? So we just saw DoubleClick Bid Manager announce their exchange product for native. That's brand new, and I think they've just been socializing that over the last few months. Yahoo's Gemini has had that product, so it's kind of entrenched now. Native is in these larger programmatic companies, and as their sales teams sell through to more advertisers this particular product, I think we'll kind of inch our way up the stairs, kind of as you're indicating. I don't know. I think for brands, it will be a challenge for them to see. Like, I'm so used to buying programmatic in a certain way. I'm so used to buying traditional ad formats, but I have spent a few $1 million on Facebook. I have spent a few $1 million on Twitter. Like, how do I combine those two ways of thinking? Which is exactly what Sara was saying. Like, we're okay with programmatic. We're okay with native. Like, what's the nexus of those things? And the fact that it's on the top tier exchanges now brings it to the center.
Okay. So we've had the tier 1 publisher speak about from a platform business.
You can say tier 1 exchange.
Tier 1 exchange?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Kevin, in the more longer tail, should we say, the more medium-sized publishers, you mentioned SMBs. Where do you think take-up is there? Because obviously the P&Gs of the world, they have huge resource and they can do that 70, 20, 10 split. But if you're a smaller publisher and you're going after maybe like SMBs, say, if you're a more regional publisher, where are they with that? Because obviously it's kind of...
So I think in the kind of mid-market, you've got pretty good adoption of kind of, I suppose, first generation native style ad networks, so kind of content recommendation, maybe in-feed ads. But I don't think we're at a point where we've got the relevance promise of native. So right now you've got, a ton of distribution in the mid-tail. Actually, I think what's lacking is programmatic adoption from the top 1,000 kind of Comscore brands.
Okay.
I think a lot of them are doing, big native kind of partner content kind of campaigns, but they're not yet making that kind of native opportunity available programmatically, and I think that is in the works. In the mid-market, I think you get the native ad styling, but you don't yet have the investment from enough small advertisers, and you don't have the piping yet, other than for the efforts of platforms like ours and MoPubs, trying to enable better relevance, better targeting, and all around kind of the better user experience, all the way from kind of look and feel through to actually surfacing valuable content that is meaningful to the user, and then taking that through the funnel to a kind of DR moment. I think it's adopted but not perfected by any means.
Sure. Dan, you seized the mic there. You clearly...
Oh, it's going to be so interesting. No, I was just going to add to that, something we are seeing from publishers nowadays, and it's quite an interesting movement, is they're like willing to take content created from either another publisher or another source, and then get their editorial team to adapt it for their audience. I don't think they've quite figured out how to scale that, but they are open to taking someone else's creative and changing that. I think that will help get some of the top Comscore, these bigger sites on board as well, because they say, okay, you don't need to do branded content and advertise like the area I work in, but we'll take what you created with someone else. We'll take your video you created, embed it, get our editorial team to write around it, and then we'll distribute that to our audience in our tone of voice. Is that true?
Okay.
No, yes, I think, but I do just want to add, I think that the reason I would say like top tier we're not ready or we're not there yet is publishers like us, I think, work very closely. They work in DFP with their ad server, and their automated connection and what makes the most sense for their marketers is through DFP, through AdX, and Google Native isn't ready yet. So although it is being circulated in the market, it's not out. There have been initiatives like AMP that have helped us as publishers start to like dip our toe in and figure it out and scale deals and set up private marketplace deals where we can have better viewability and that sort of the native feel. But actually programmatic native in that setting is not there yet. So I think it's not that so much that publishers aren't willing to do it. I think that they just haven't been able to, but are really excited for being able to do so soon.
Okay. Actually, on that, how much of a deal breaker do you think that will be when DFP is ready for programmatic native? Because obviously they have a huge market share.
Well, I mean, I think that will be it. I mean, I think that's when we'll start seeing more and more of it. I think obviously we still need to work as closely as we can with the marketers to see if that's something they're ready for, and we have to kind of do that together. But I think it'll definitely help, because it'll help us be able to scale the business and not be in this state where we're customizing every sort of campaign that we do. Sure.
Okay. Well, we referenced earlier on about how there's something of a, programmatic is for DR, native for branding, etc., etc. One of the things that could be difficult to work out, as programmatic native, as a, in your media model, your media mix, would be the measurements, the metrics for success. Dan, I wanted to ask you, because obviously you work within the wider Dentsu family. I mean, when you're speaking to your colleagues over at Sara or one of the other the media planners, I mean, what do they say? Like, how,
I might have to do a plug for Nudge here, but for me it is about that. And again, as someone that creates branded content, so I'm largely using native to drive people to the content that I create. I am all about that post-click measurement. So I'm obviously interested in creating units which capture attention, but I'm also more interested in how we then hold that attention through to when they actually land on the content. So I'm interested in time spent with the content, I'm interested in scroll rate, etc. And then I'm also interested in all the engagement metrics off that, in terms of, are people then sharing it, Are they, whether that be dark posting, sharing it within, copying URLs, etc., but also of course across social. And again, if you think about that mobile experience, are people just instantly sharing it? So they're the sort of, it's that post-click metrics that I'm really keen on understanding, rather than just, what's my click-through rate on an ad, to see if I'm creating compelling content.
Sure. What about the rest of yourselves? I mean, how do you guys try and kind of move it along, trying to get this into more branding, those bigger budgets, as opposed to the DR, which is kind of quite simple to measure?
Yeah, I think the promise of kind of combining programmatic and native is, on the native side of the ecosystem, you have got investment in actual content, actual value added, entertaining, informative, heavily invested content. And on the programmatic side of things, you have the tools to be able to deliver investment at scale, and also to be able to target at a granular level, and to optimize using feedback from things like Nudge. So I think we're moving to a point now where, if the industry were to embrace native programmatic as that opportunity to actually finally kind of get to branding through programmatic, or DR through native, both of which are possible. The opportunity here is to kind of remove all the silos in the user journey. So I think one of the problems that we come across a lot is that the whole branding part of an agency or a brand's investment will sit in one silo, and the DR and biddable media part will sit in another silo.
Yeah.
And you will engage a user and measure, using a platform like Nudge, you'll be able to measure that this user has spent 20 seconds on a page, or has viewed 3 pages, or has scrolled 60% down the page. Now that's a more qualified user than just a click. And that is an opportunity to say, okay, this audience is now valuable. But I think what a lot of folks are missing at the moment is that the average consumer reads 11 pieces of content before making a purchase. So if you can leverage programmatic native properly with the full funnel from branding to DR, what you would be able to do is to take that insight and analytics of the post-click and then tell a story, sequence content to people that takes them further and further down the funnel, has a conversation with them. I know that sounds cliched, but it is possible. And I think that the industry is just a bit terrified of actually going ahead and doing that. For 4 or 5 years, we heard, a lot of people talking about, DR, and retargeting is the only thing that you can do with programmatic, and now there's this opportunity to actually deliver, a real valuable personalized user experience, and then to drive that through to results. And where we have seen the silos broken down, the results that we have seen are kind of ROI to the tune of 6, 7, 8-fold, versus just having each discipline kind of separated.
Well, why do those silos remain? You said people are kind of terrified. Is it just like protecting vested interests? Or what?
I think it's kind of 2 or 3-fold. Number one is, the existing technology incumbents, like the Generation 1 platforms.
You can name names if you want.
We were just talking about it. And so Google, DoubleClick, has not fully invested in native. Most major DSPs, SSPs have not fully invested in native. Even where they've added it to the toolkit, it's kind of an afterthought. It's not, it doesn't measure engagement post-click. It doesn't measure kind of meaningful, engagement. It doesn't help you find content or bulk upload, millions of messages that could be personalized to people. And those messages exist. So I think it's number one, legacy platforms. I think number two, it is that the industry is distracted by other problems like fraud, fake news, and a bunch of other things, So what I think we would put out there is that if you were to move your distraction from, squeezing an extra 0.001% CTR out of a display ad, and you were to shift your focus to new platforms that have got fraud prevention built in, have more naturally viewable ad formats that do engage users, not with meaningless click-through rates, but with actual engagement. That's when the optimizations you make with partners like Integral Ad Science or with, partners like Nudge can actually be meaningful, like 20-30% uplift, not point something, So I think there's a ton holding us back, but the brands that have experienced, breaking down the silos and have experienced the quality of native, the digital first brands like Dollar Shave Club and Plated and Blue Apron, those guys have gone fully native, basically have moved all their budgets to native and are investing heavily in content and native DR. So I think it's possible.
I'd agree. I think also to get more brands to buy on native has a little bit of like a little brother syndrome, and I say that because it's coming of age in a time that other ad formats didn't have to deal with. We mentioned DFP. If anyone doesn't know, it's DoubleClick for publishers. It's like Google's suite for management. And when DoubleClick was scaling, like nobody was asking about viewability. Like that just wasn't a question. Fraud, of course, has always kind of been top of mind, but fraud to the degree that Moat and Integral Ad Science are trying to show if who's real, who isn't, what's viewable, what isn't. Like the video and certainly standard banners in programmatic, they weren't sort of held to that level of scrutiny while they were scaling. I think native, has this kind of little brother syndrome in that it has to deal with the issues that other ad formats created well before its time. And so like why isn't DFP or other sort of viewability metrics, vendors, or DCM or ActiveView, whatever it might be, like they're building to those products that were first caused by like standard banners, and then now they have to build to the part of the business that's the largest, which is their standard bread and butter, and then they'll eventually come back to native. And I think it's a challenge that native, because it's so new, has to deal with other issues that were previously on the scene, and then they have to play catch up. And native is kind of the last to get it because there isn't as much budget behind it. So I think I would like to see, because we know that native is growing so much, the priority should actually be flipped. It's like prioritize the thing that's new and growing rather than your legacy business. But of course, business-wise, any product manager is going to choose the legacy business over the new thing.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, Sarah, did you have something to chip in there, or I just sort of I couldn't quite see if you're trying to like nod your head or get involved there.
Oh no.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, look, kind of we went through the different ad types. What do you think is going to be the best ad format for programmatic native to really make it scale? I remember when we were talking beforehand about the trade desk results, and that's how native went up well and mobile also performed quite well. Do you think mobile is ultimately kind of the best place you could be able to monetize programmatic native?
So I think native began to accelerate in terms of, as you were talking about earlier, the adoption of kind of app install advertisers and those kind of more DR advertisers have naturally adopted native for mobile because it's a mobile-friendly format that avoids, accidental thumbs and it's more embedded into the feed and it allows you to be a little bit more responsive with creative. So yeah, I think investment in mobile native and in-app native is ahead of desktop and kind of mobile web. And I think if you look at the trade desk results, it was like 700% growth in native, 400% growth in in-app, and the two metrics are not separate. They overlap for sure, and in-app is growing because of native and vice versa. But I think in terms of the long view, I think native kind of gets rid of this barrier of formats, so whether the ad is in feed or in a right rail, although I think they're kind of dying things as well, wherever the ad is placed on the page, it fundamentally matches the form, function, look, feel, and ideally the context and the relevance of the environment. So I think we can actually go beyond the format now and say, well, we'll optimize to the placement wherever that is on the page, and we will surface valuable, relevant user experiences wherever you are on the page, and sure. I think we'll go past that.
Okay. Sarah, what do you think would be kind of the most ideal? So would it be for monetizing the mobile content or?
Mobile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we created our native ad unit. The Flex Frame started on mobile. As we're looking to scale and customize and do this whole native ad programmatically, I think that we should look to mobile, as mobile is, a platform that is getting more and more views, basically.
Okay. Jacob, you mentioned you guys have a host of products. What's kind of like the most popular performing one on MoPub?
So native can be it's like you take the same set of assets and you rearrange them in different ways. So one of the complications with native has been like, what is the name of it? Like, is it a carousel? Like, is it product placement? As we've been going out and evangelizing native, we've kind of gotten questions along the way that kind of point to what you were asking earlier, like, what is it called? So we've got like in-stream, outfeed, like, is what Taboola and Outbrain does in terms of recommended content. Like, is that native? Is it not native? There's just like so many different ways to phrase the idea of like content that's sitting in other content, but one of those content pieces is an ad, like that type of conversation. There hasn't really been alignment. There's a company in France called Teads. They kind of do native video, but like what makes it native besides the fact that it's sitting in between paragraphs of an article, I'm not sure. So the idea of what native counts as is kind of like, it's a bit of a loaded question in my opinion. I think native is definitely around for the long haul. It'll be a question of what configuration of assets is the most true for a publisher in terms of like a native experience, and whether or not we call that in-stream, outfeed, inline. I don't like. What are some others? Surely you've heard of others, right? Like, I guess, what do you guys call your product? Well, it's
ours is the flex frame, but
right.
There
It's
are
like flex
tons.
frame, right? It's like very special, very bespoke. Like if we were to try and scale that up to other publishers, like what would we even call it? And I think that's kind of the challenge. I think at the end of the day, static native has got to scale before native video does. But it's like which version of the same idea is going to scale, and it's too fragmented right now, in my opinion.
Sure. Okay. Dan, what about yourself? What's the easiest sell in for clients whenever you're kind of saying, let's do native?
Oh, well, for me, it's sponsored content.
Right.
But I think again,
the format is like is that mobile video.
Well, I think mobile. I to agree to, because I think native just fits naturally in the feed.
Yeah.
I think if you just think about the way you scroll through a feed, you want it to appear that way, and we know that banners in mobile don't really work. And in terms of overall display advertising, I think that's all going to turn into native eventually. So I think on that end of the scale, it's just naturally that you try and tailor your ad copy and your ad creative rather than thinking about 250 by 300 or some small unit. You actually just think about how it fits within the page or within the feed.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, look, we're coming quite close to the end of the time. I saw somebody just sort of shaking their head quite violently with some of the statements. We will have like a quick Q&A session afterwards, so you can all raise your points. But there was one thing that we mentioned earlier, which I thought was kind of really important, and that was the whole fake news. Where do you draw the line between commercial content that's adding value? We said fake news because everybody's talking about it these days. Sara, I wanted to ask yourself, obviously, a very lauded title like your own. I know that the FTC were looking into the whole native advertising formats. It's 2013, it was about 4 years ago. How do you guys draw that line? Because obviously, title like yours, it's church and state, blah, 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 but at the end of the day, you've got to make some money, and how do those conversations pan out? I hate to pick on you, but it's obviously you're the New York Times,
I'm
right?
the obvious choice. I mean, we obviously take it very seriously, and it's that decision that every publisher needs to make is like, do you want to be in the programmatic space? Because that's something that happens. I think one thing that the New York Times is doing, like I'm quite proud of, is we are looking at programmatic as a way of transacting and not about remnant or DR focused or that sort of thing. So we're looking at it as premium CPMs. We're talking directly to marketers, and we're making that fake news aspect be able to happen as little as possible. And that's kind of why we're looking at native as a huge opportunity, because we're directly working with marketers that care about the content and care about what's on their site. And even I would say, like for video, like we're not transparent in the open marketplace. If you want to buy advertising, you work with us directly, and I think that helps.
Yeah. Was it like, did you guys have to put like an editorial board and just kind of like the editor says, no, that's too much, like it looks like an ad, or it looks like one of our articles? So, I mean, I'm just interested, as a working for a publisher myself.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge, massive creative process that goes into it.
I guess where the line between church and state was drawn, if you know what I mean. Did there have to get the editorial involved to say, how did you guys arrive at that?
I would say we work with the editorial team,
right.
I guess you could say, but I mean, it's the writing of what the editorial and our reporters do is completely separate.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, that was a little bit of a selfish question, just purely interested. Okay, obviously, Dan, you mentioned earlier on about producing quality content, and it's not just. But again, how do you guys draw that line between because you got to get a commercial message through as well.
You do, but it's beyond. I think some people just think it's about clearly labeling it and things like that. But it's actually about trust, and it's trusting the publisher to create content that actually will resonate with their audience, and then also building that trust with the consumer. So we take, like I say, an audience-led approach in terms of we genuinely look to create content that so we won't work with New York Times, for example, and say, we'll say, here's our key messaging, but we say, how would you land that to your consumer in an authentic way? And how do we maintain that authenticity? And that's about a trusted relationship. Mm-hmm. So when we're producing content, you always got to think that. I think when brands come in and try and say, take too much control over that content and really try and shoehorn their message in and just try and disguise advertising as content, that's when you start losing interest from the audience. And it might just have a negative backlash, actually. You just want to be fully transparent and just trust the publisher.
Okay, great. Well, look, you've had enough of my questions. The floor's open to you guys. Is there anybody that sort of, has any burning kind of questions for any of our esteemed panelists? Okay, great.
I'm curious about this spectrum.
Sorry, could you stop and say where you're from?
James Law from Brooklyn.
That's great to know. What side of the industry are you from?
Working on an influencer marketing platform that connects creators with sponsors without sacrificing authenticity.
Awesome. All right.
Very interested in this spectrum. You got the different formats. I really think it's just 3 different types of formats. You got your in-feed, you've got your sponsored content, and then you've got the stuff that matches the form and function, but it's not outside content getting injected. It's into a feed. It's in the article itself. So it's like a boosted post versus the in-feeds. But I'm just curious, do you think that every publisher is going to implement a news feed like Facebook? Because that's obviously where native spending is prevalent, in Twitter as well. And I really am curious to think that maybe programmatic sponsorship is possible. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, first, in terms of the publishers, I think most publishers will build they should be building within Facebook and etc. And especially as Facebook roll that product out and try and you got Apple News and those sort of products and Snapchat obviously with their Discover product. So I think if you're a publisher, you have an opportunity to build and tailor your content for where the audience happens to be, then that just makes complete sense. And then in terms of sponsored programmatic
sponsorship, I know that it's a really time-intensive process to create this type of content, but is there a way to maintain authenticity and just bring a brand in to sponsor retroactively, passively? Make you do that programmatically?
Oh, can I build on that?
Sure.
And to have that content align not just to the user, but to the context of the other content surrounding it. That seems to be the biggest issue.
It's like the difference between injecting a contrived message into an article and slapping a sticker on a guitar or a helmet, or a skateboarder.
Yeah, I mean, context is really important, obviously. So I think if you create a piece of content, and then I think in a lot of platforms, correct me if I'm wrong, such as PowerLinks and the likes, they offer that they have this ability to sort of read the page and understand the context, both in terms of what that page is. Is it a piece of editorial? Is it e-commerce site, etc. And then implant the piece of content into something that's contextually relevant. So if you create a piece of content on hair care, it will put it in the relevant content. And also look, if you're creating an instructional video versus sort of an actual just piece of entertaining content, it will match that to the context as well, I believe. Is that true, Kevin? Yeah, and there's lots of tools out there that, like I say, they read the page and they're able to categorize it in more ways than just sort of the standard ways. So they have ways of doing it, I believe.
And then I would just add to that, like publishers are doing that now. We definitely do programmatic sponsorships, programmatic guaranteed sponsorships. So that stuff's happening.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay, Ben.
So, my sister in New Zealand, she runs a writing school, and so she creates content. Of course, she's my sister. Do we think? I'm keen to hear from the panelists. Does programmatic get to a point where if she's got $50 a month to spend, that she can spend it?
All right, who wants to?
I think we're already there. Yeah, the question was, his sister has a writing school. If she wants to promote her business with a relatively small budget, let's say $50 a month, are we at the point yet, or when will we be at the point where she could spend that $50 on programmatic directly? And I think the good news is like we're actually almost already there. And I say that because as these bigger players, for example, Yahoo, Twitter, they have LinkedIn now, they have syndication-based products. So when you buy $50 of ads on LinkedIn, it's serving on LinkedIn, but it's also getting pushed out into the larger ecosystem. It's largely being pushed out in that same format, right? They want to take like a LinkedIn ad or a Twitter ad and push it out into other properties. And so maybe a writer isn't logged in, or a potential writer, potential client isn't logged into LinkedIn that day, but LinkedIn knows that they have writing as an interest, and so they'll target that user elsewhere. And they don't have to, like, she doesn't have to come up with her own special creative. She can use the same promoted post that she was using on Twitter or LinkedIn and see it syndicated out across the ecosystem. So it's kind of business by business to decide what the percentage is. Like, is this campaign going to run 100% on LinkedIn, or is it going to run 50% on LinkedIn and 50% off network? Because we can find those users somewhere else. But I would say we're kind of already there. It's just a matter of scaling it up.
I would say the same. I mean, we're doing that now. I mean, we have, I would say most publishers are creating some sort of audience extension content syndication play, where if you have a smaller budget, then we can help extend off of our audience.
But you still get like the magic of New York Times or LinkedIn or Twitter, right?
Yes.
Like you still get that targeting, that creative, but it's in, I mean, I think it's important to note because there have been cases where people have sort of asked, like, particularly in the case of Twitter, we have a product called Audience Platform. You run on Twitter, it also runs off Twitter. People kind of get angsty. They're like, wait a minute, I'm paying for this to run on Twitter in this sort of premium placement. What do you mean my budgets are going outside of that? And I think the answer is, like, we're adding in something special to the mix with data and also visually how it looks, in addition to the reporting that you get later. But it's sort of important to note that you can run on programmatic even if you don't have a small budget, because existing platforms are going off network.
Okay. Great. Well, look, if there's no more questions from the audience, I'm sure our panelists are around afterwards. If you're too shy about asking publicly, I'm sure you can all have a quick word. But I think that kind of wraps it up from us. Ben, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yep. So thank you so much for coming along. Stay around. There's a little bit more cheese and honey and a few more drinks if you'd like to join us. But I wondered if we could put our hands together for our great panelists. Thank you so much.